I'm the founder and CEO of Warp. Um, Very excited to be here, coming back. As I was saying, almost been 5 years, but just as beautiful and super, super excited to chat with you all. Talk a little bit about my, I guess, journey, growing up in this like, yeah, how I found out sort of work, sort of based out of New York. So we'll talk about that. One thing I'll say, if you not to be confused with Warp.dev, which is a terminal product, they're an older company. We're the cooler one. We're the one that's like over here, and the Warp.dev is over here. So if there's any confusion, and you're expecting a different one, this is different Warp. This is the newer, better Warp. No, I'm just throwing shit. I think Warp.dev is a great product. I've used it too. And I've chatted with their team. They're awesome. Um, cool. So a little bit about me. Name is Ayush, as I mentioned. I was class of 2020. I studied computer science and physics. Um, Stayed on for like 2 semesters to do a master's. Then I worked at Yelp doing machine learning on large scale distributed systems before starting a company. So as I was mentioning a little bit earlier, I grew up in this very small town in India where, like, to give you a sense of that, we didn't have like fast, reliable internet. I think finally it has changed in the last few years with like the new Geo stuff, if you track that at all. But when I was growing, it was like literally you plug in like a little like stick into your computer with a modem and it would like boot up. And so somehow I ended at MIT because halfway through like my high school, I decided I really wanted to study physics. And so growing up, is anybody taking like physics major courses? Okay, okay, please fine. Okay, great. So growing up, that was just kind of like I was reading a lot of Richard Feynman. I was reading all these books, and it was so fascinating that I really thought in my heart that I would grow up and become a theoretical physicist, and that was the thing I wanted to do. So of course, I come to MIT first semester, I take a CS course, and I start getting pulled to the dark side, so to speak. And thankfully, I'm actually kind of glad that I took some of that because I found that it maintained that intellectual purity of just like hard theoretical problems, but also it was super applicable. So I could go out and build something, which like my high school didn't even have computer science. So it was just really amazing to actually get to do that. I'm very grateful that I did. And as I was mentioning, after that, I graduated. I had done a bunch of like machine learning internships and ended up at Yelp with the team that I really liked in their core machine learning team, empowering kind of like the rest of the infrastructure at large scale, working on some cool problems. A little bit about Warp and what we're doing as a company, and then I'll get to other things as well. So we're building an LLM-driven HR, payroll, tax compliance platform. Our mission is to kind of build this AI native. Think of it as like the administrative backend of fast-growing startups. So if you start a company, there's so much administrative work that you have to keep up with. Anybody here starting a startup has done one or is thinking of like, where are folks? Anybody thinking of starting a startup? Potentially. Okay, 2 people. Okay. Or okay. Has anybody tried starting a startup, like maybe while being in school? Okay, one person. Two, one, two, two and a half. Good question. I think what constitutes a startup is like not a project, but like a real company where you're like, oh, this is taking most of my waking hours. Like that's probably the definition. Okay. Okay, cool. Um, and we're trying to give everybody kind of the world's best VP of finance and operations using AI. We launched in kind of like May of last year publicly. We have about 2.5 million revenue very quickly. We grew in like oops, 10 in about 10 months, and we've been growing ever since. We've doubled, more than doubled this year alone. We've built a crack team. We're all kind of based in New York, relatively sort of younger team, but some awesome people. We have this like person who dropped out of UPenn last semester, was adding videos and go back and is working with us. Uh, Folks from Brex and Stripes and awesome companies. And we've raised about 25 million in less than 2 years from people like Y Combinator, Sound Ventures, which is Ashton Kutcher's firm. Like you may have seen some of his movies, but he's invested in like companies like Uber, Snapchat, and Airbnb, and has been doing that for like 15 years. Some MIT folks you might recognize: Drew Houston, Arash, Kyle. They're all small investors and part investors, part of our cap table, and it's been amazing. I'm Judd, the CEO of Replit as well. Um, what we're trying to do, and I'll try to like keep this part pretty concise and get to more interesting things, but it helps to kind of understand the problem we're solving is we noticed this very frustrating thing. I personally dealt with this in the previous startup I was working at, is in the US, there's something like 700 tax agencies. And what happens with that is you try to start a company, you hire people. As soon as you have even one person anywhere, any jurisdiction, you have to do all the .gov paperwork for those places. And that can become really, really complicated. There's never been any APIs to interact with these things programmatically. It's like government agencies, like they'll never actually even build APIs. So what we started doing basically is we were looking at this, essentially this kind of like, you might have come across this chart that's like every few months, the length of tasks AIs can do independently has been doubling steadily. And so this almost this like scaling law exponential curve that we've been on. And this is actually like a little bit earlier. I think we're doing pretty well over here. So I was looking at this, but like, hey, I think we can apply these things towards autonomously going to imagine like .gov websites, portals, navigating on behalf of our customers and making sure they are always compliant and never have to deal with these things themselves. Um, and so we built this sort of platform to do a couple of things. First, we just use agents to automate all your tax compliance as a business. We allow you to very easily hire people, pay them, send them offer letters, and we can also get health insurance and 401k and benefits and whatnot. Um, cool. So that's a little bit about what we're up to. What I want to chat about, I think maybe today, is a couple of almost like assortment of lessons that I've learned in trying to start a startup. I have always been in about 2 years that I've started this company, I've probably learned the most than any other period in my life. Maybe like the first year that I've had a major company like that. But it's been really amazing. So a couple of things that I'd love to share. First is this is how almost all startups get started. It's like if you've heard of that JFK code, hello, welcome. If you've heard of that JFK code, that's like we do these things not because they're easy, but because they're hard. Like it's talking about going to the moon, right? And so in startups, it's almost always the opposite, where you think, how hard could it be? And you just get started. And that's how almost all the best startups in the world got started. Um, one thing that I think that would be is sort of helpful for engineers to think about is this transition from a technical engineer to a founder or CEO. So if you're thinking about starting a company, um, I'm sure you guys write awesome code, so did I. There's so many problems that you come across when you start a company that don't take the shape of like write code, pass test, build it, and then you're done. So a couple of those things that come to mind. Number one, and this is, I think, a lot of engineers fall into this trap, and I'd like to avoid it, hopefully, if you can, is always start with a concrete problem, not a technical, right? And I think, from what I remember, I think my time at MIT, it's always, as an engineer, you're always fascinated with like, oh, this new piece of tech, this like new programming language, or LLMs, or crypto, or blockchain, whatever new like exciting tech is. It's very easy to be excited about that, but you should almost always focus more on a concrete problem you could solve for somebody. And then, as opposed to starting from technology, because then you're asking yourself, oh, what could I do with this, right? And that's not really a great place to find sort of ideas. Number two is you will need to learn to like sell. Uh, and once again, this is another thing that all engineers sort of look at the word sales or sell, they kind of sneer at it, right? So, I mean, I was the same way. And I can tell you that like so many things in building a company look like selling that you might not think of them as. So for example, recruiting other awesome engineers to come work for your startup, especially when it's like really early and risky and like things might sort of are very chaotic. That's a something that where you're selling somebody on the vision of your company and why it's an amazing place and to come work at. I would argue like this talk here, you know, I'm technically selling you guys the idea of maybe potentially starting a startup if you're a technical person. Uh, Same goes for fundraising, working, building teams, and so on. All those. selling. And more concretely too, like if you build a product and you want people to actually use it, you'll have to talk to them and learn how to solve their specific problem. And it's better to keep the point number one in mind to get good at number two, which is like if, as long as you're focusing on the problem, not just like the technology or whatever or the features, that's a good place to be in. And finally, is something that I've noticed a lot, which is as an engineer, I think you should really trust your uh, system optimizing thinking brain, um, because it's really valuable. I think you should be like, oh, I'm a technical person, I'm an engineer, and I've like built systems and I've optimized them and understand like how complex things work together. That's a very helpful lens when you're starting a company because over and over you're just building systems and optimizing them, whether that's like a part of your product or something like building a functional team that accomplishes goals and like gets better over time. Though almost all things and all problems will take the form of this, but some won't. And so, for example, like if you're starting a company, you're hiring somebody, you'll come across like you have to deal with people, and people are messy, and oftentimes uh, you will want to almost like know when to turn off your engineering systems brain and think slightly differently. So there will be areas, just be prepared that like not all problems will take that shape. And it's important to keep in mind just like what problem you should apply an engineering brain to and what like maybe almost like call it a CEO founder brain or something like that. Um, one area that so if you're thinking about startups, right? I think we're talking about ideas. Um, Paul Graham has this awesome essay that you should maybe have read it. If you haven't, have you come across this? Maybe who's read this one? No. Okay. So schlep blindness. I'll just read this one part that's like the schlep is just like this word that just means like tedious. Um, and so I'll read this part. No one likes schlep, but hackers especially dislike them. Most hackers who start startups wish they could do it by just writing clever software, putting it on a server somewhere, writing and just writing code and watching the money roll in without ever having to talk to people, negotiate with other companies, or deal with people's broken code. Maybe that's possible, but I haven't seen it. So this is really, really important. Right? I think um, this this is actually how Stripe got started. They looked at a very, very annoying, tedious problem that so many people had overlooked, which is how to pay easily on the internet. And almost everybody had come across this problem, anyone that had tried to do any transaction over the internet, but everyone overlooked it because of what Paul calls the Schlep blindness phenomenon, which is we almost sort of tune out hard things in favor of easier, flashier things. And the reason it's useful is because almost all shiny and obvious startup ideas eventually get like, or very early on get taken by other people. And not all of them work, but at the same time, you want to come across ideas that are overlooked. And because you'll be one of the few people in the world even trying to solve them. And that gives you a huge advantage when you're trying to build a multi-billion dollar company that could like do something really, really big and awesome someday. Um, and so to reiterate, I think as a founder, you'll often have to do things that you dislike. Um, and it is a great way to discover startup ideas by asking yourself, what I wish someone would solve for me. So like you want to solve all these problems, but then if you ask yourself, oh, what are some like really annoying, frustrating things that you have to deal with, or like some gap that you're like, I wish someone would do this for me. This is actually how we got started. Like I was at my previous startup and I remember this one really annoying day of like just dealing with a bunch of New York tax agencies because we had hired there and like, there was like a fine that we were facing because we missed filing something within 30 days deadline or whatever. It's like nobody really has the time for that, especially in a startup. And I thought I would pay somebody to make this problem go away right now. And so that kernel of the idea stuck with me. And that's like what became the kind of initial beginnings of what we're doing today. Um, and finally, it also helps to be ignorant, right? Like I think if you like one of the great advantage that young people have, and like I think all of you guys have, is you can go into your problem space that you know nothing about, and you could actually be very confident and be like, you know what, how hard could it be? Oh, of course I could do it. And it is a blessing to have that beginner's mind and that fresh perspective of like, yeah, we're just gonna solve this. And so many of the best companies in the world, um, Patrick Collison, when he started Stripe, I don't think he knew much about payments. Brian Chesky didn't know much about like what would eventually be called this like sharing economy or staying in like strangers' homes somehow. And so it helps to have this perspective, and you should kind of lean into that. You should apply that. Okay, so if some of you, looks like some of you are at least interested in startups, and maybe the rest of you might be part of one someday, might even start companies. Um, so a little bit of like who should start a startup. Um, So before I do that, I will start with the opposite, which is why you shouldn't start a startup. So I'll try to actually convince you not to start a startup for at least the next few minutes, and then we'll talk about why you may still want to do it. Number one, startups are really hard because of your own psychology. Uh, so on paper, there isn't something super hard about startups. Like I think you try to build something, you try to solve a problem, you build something new, you recruit people, maybe you have some funding, you build a team. It's like, okay, it's like on paper, these things aren't very hard. The reason it's actually hard when you try to do it is because of your own psychology. Um, because starting a startup is just like this thing over and over, sometimes like 10 times a day. Uh, and so what happens is like this cycle repeats itself sometime, like a month, week, daily basis, where like I'm the emperor, god, king of the world. We're going to build a $10 billion company. I know exactly, next year will be massive. And then you're like, oh shit, we're fucked. It's all over. And you can cycle through these two emotions and two modes, like in an hour. Like I've had days where I had this multiple times. Um, there are also other better ways to maximize your positive EV dollar value if like that's what you're trying to do in life, which is, hey, like I think you could go work at Meta and like from what I've heard, they seem to be paying pretty well for talented engineers. Um, it's like it's really, really against the corner looks like, so that makes sense. Um, and so you could definitely, especially folks here that have the MIT stamp, just know that you have all these paths, I'm sure you do, where you could go maximize, like make money. So it's not a great way to make money on a positive EV basis to start a company. Um, and then finally, this is kind of underrated. Like for the most part, you're on your own. If you start a company, if you found a startup, for the most part, you're going to be on your own. And that's not to say you'll have friends and you'll have like maybe investors and maybe your peers. What people don't realize about that though often is nobody will build your company for you. Nobody will have ever enough context on your company, on your problem to do it as well and as deeply and like in a dedicated way as you. So what that means is you will often feel like you are really on your own and you have to figure this thing out. So those are some of the things that make it hard. Um, and so a few things that you might have come across. Like Elon has a very famous quote, being an entrepreneur, starting companies like chewing glass and starting to the abyss. It's a very dark quote. I don't know why he said that. It's very discouraging, but you get the idea. Um, and then there's also this book by Ben Horowitz, who's the Z in like A16Z. Ben and Mark Andreessen started Netscape, I believe, back in the day, basically like one of the first browsers on the internet. And then Ben sold a company called LoudCloud for like 1.5 billion. This is, I believe, 90s, early 2000s something. But he wrote this book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And I would encourage you to try and read this if you're interested in like just learning like what it's like to be build a massive company and why it's hard. And he talks about he the book is basically just an anthology of like everything that went wrong on his path to like selling this company for 1.5 billion. Like there were so many incidents where they almost died, they almost ran out of money, they run into very critical people problems, uh, and eventually it all works out. But the big takeaway from this book is like it's really, really hard. Um, and so okay. You guys are still here. You haven't walked out of this talk, I suppose. So if you're still potentially going to start a startup someday, um, why might you do it? And I think in some ways the actual answer is like if you just can't not start a company. Um, and so I know how that's a tautological answer. It's almost not helpful. So I'll try to give you like a non-circular reference answer, which hopefully is a little bit helpful. So you should start a startup if you have a problem that you think you can uniquely solve. So you have some insight into the world, you have some insight into a problem, you have some insight into new technology that could like do something really better. Um, but that's not enough. You also want to have some semblance of why that thing that you are potentially going to build could benefit lots of people. So if you're working on something that could like only benefit like a very small number of people one day, that alone won't translate to a startup. So you want to be thinking about like, okay, I have some insight into something, but this could actually be big. And the latter part is actually almost very hard and impossible. Like one back to Brian Chesky's like Airbnb example, when they started, everybody almost rejected them, all the investors and people, because they thought, well, like how many people are going to be willing to like stay in random other strangers' houses? That seems very dangerous and crazy. There were similar complaints about Uber. Who wants to get into a stranger's taxi like off a random person? So it's very hard to actually do the latter part, but like it's good to have some semblance of that when you're starting. Um, Another good reason to start a startup is if you just can't imagine working with someone else. Um, I'd say a good part of like why I started a company was kind of this. I was a pretty bad employee. Um, and if you think that you might be in that position where you just don't work really well when you're working for someone else, and then you find that if you're doing something on your own, whether it's like a project or you're building like a cool thing on your own, or you're writing something, and you find that that's where you really shine. Is certainly the case for me, and I think that that's a good reason to at least think about starting a company. And finally, if you just want to be the best version of yourself, um, I don't know how much of this will make sense. Like, I feel like it's one of those things where you kind of have to go. So I'm 28 now. I feel very old compared to most of the people you guys here. And partly it's just like I feel like the startup time has just like aged me very quickly in a good way, where it's like learned so much. But it's very underrated and underappreciated how uh, building a company and starting something from scratch is a immensely successful and almost like pressurized, forceful container for just being the best version of yourself. So why that's important? I mean, like you want to be the person in life over time that people can rely on, right? Like your friends, your family. You want to be the kind of person that'll be there for them. And I think for what it's worth, as starting a company where you go through lots of setbacks and lots of like bad things happen to you, it's a great way to just adopt this thing of like, yeah, like I figure it out, like no matter what, right? And that's a great person to have. Cool. So maybe final few things I'd love to share. I wish some of the things that I wish I was told back when I was here, because I feel like there are so many things I would do a little bit differently if I were to and come to MIT again. So hopefully these are helpful. Um, Number one is I think so. I know you guys are forced to the house requirements, and a lot of people like end up hating them and whatnot. Uh, but I would say it's still very useful. So you guys, it's still very useful to gain some breadth. Also, I should wrap up in like maybe 5 minutes or so. Okay, cool. Just mindful of time. We're almost there. I think you should gain some breadth. You should try to actually learn things that are in other areas that you haven't sort of explored before. Uh, and at the same time, you should also try to go deep in a technical area. So yeah. And so that's like a T-shaped sort of person that you want to be, where you can go really, really deep in one area, and then, but you also have an understanding of like simultaneous things. So I took a bunch of like neuroscience, cognitive science, economics, and so on. I think they've really informed and shaped how I think about products and company building and startups even to this day. Um, but also just like going deep in machine learning in my sort of back when it was still called ML, or everybody started calling it AI or whatever. That was really cool. and really helped me. I will tell you to potentially not drop out, even though I love the dropout folks. We have someone on our team who did that, and he's trying to go back. His mom keeps telling him, like, maybe just finish the last three courses and get the degree. I will tell you not to drop out because it is really underappreciated by folks here, just like the concentration of smart people you have around you. And free time, which I know probably doesn't feel like free time at all if you're taking any, like reasonable course work. Um, but it becomes very hard to find something like that. And like, or rather maybe free time, it's like not as much responsibility. That's a better way to put it. And you can just do whatever you want. You can take the courses you want, you can talk to people and build things, and you will never get this concentration of those two things together ever in your life. And finally, you can find, if you're for starting a company, you can find co-founders, you can find life co-founders, like people call that like a wife or a husband or marrying someone. Um, and so I genuinely think that that's a very massive advantage of being at a place like this. You could come across somebody and just like work with them or live with them for years to come. Um, and so to that end, I met Gabriella. She was here, so of course, the almost 8 years ago, and then a week and a half ago we got married. After um, and we've had an incredible time. She makes me better in all these ways, and we met here solving physics problems that in Simmons like lounge or something. Um, we are not co-founders, but we're like the life co-founders, right? So, and so to kind of tie that point, like if you ever start a company or try to do anything worthwhile, it's assume that it's going to be at least a 10-year journey. Doing hard thing takes a while. This is like a classic, like if you try to start a company, sort of how it goes, you get this like initial dopamine hit from like launch. It used to be TechCrunch. TechCrunch not as relevant. Maybe it's like Twitter launch or whatever. And then novelty wears off, and you're in this like plateau, low phase of just like grinding and working, and nothing's working. And then you go through like maybe you dip below like even zero. You're like, oh shit, we're really fucked. Um, and then maybe some wiggles of false hope. You get some user. It turns out it's actually just like bots. And then you build, and it should potentially. But this thing can easily take 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and it is amazing to have somebody by your side, whether that's like a co-founder in a company environment or just like in life as a partner with you that can I think sort of match the sort of level of drive and ambition that you have, is also super smart and can grow with you for years to come. So for something like that, um, you will never be in a better position in life to find someone like that, than right here at MIT. So like everything's been vetted for you, right? Like you go out in the real world, it's like you gotta vet people yourself. But here, everybody has been vetted by the MIT admissions office. They've done a great job, and so everyone's next to you, around you, is already like a great person and super hardworking and super smart. And so it's take advantage of that. And with that, thank you. If I I'll plug this call to action a little bit. We are hiring engineers across infrastructure, applied AI, product roles. We have a team of 20 in a beautiful office in New York. So for if you want to be in the close to East Coast, we're there. It's an awesome place. If you're starting a company, for those folks, like use joinwarp.com. We'll probably be on warp.com by the time you start a company. It's in progress. But we make hiring, onboarding, paying people really, really easy. You never have to deal with manual work. And if you need me for anything, questions, advice, roles, hiring, sounding board, I'm at ayush@joinwork.com. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming. Awesome. Wow, look at that. It's like 1 minute before the. Of course, yeah. How's it going, man? Okay.